I remember exactly where I was and when I first heard Led Zeppelin. It was early 1969, and I was over at Joe Rish's house. Joe was the guitar player for the best garage band in Cheyenne. And I was just hanging out with Joe, and all of a sudden, the guy who played drums in that band, Steve Schwen, comes running up, and he's got a record album in his hands. And he says, "You guys got to hear this." And this is what he had. So as it seemed to be a matter of some urgency, Joe put it on the record player. And we stood there and listened to it, looked at the record, looked at each other, and boom, had our minds blown. We knew that it was a new day, because we had never heard anything like it. And for people who have grown up with Led Zeppelin, or some people hearing this will go, "Oh yeah, my parents liked Led Zeppelin," you know. It may seem like no big deal, but at the time, it was a game-changing thing that Jimmy Page did. He discovered a new way to record rock and roll with this album. And if you stick around past my personal Led Zeppelin anecdote, I'm going to explain. I'll explain a little bit of how Page came up with the sound of that thing. But first, my Led Zeppelin story, one of them is, well, I was lucky. I got to see them 5 times. They were always incredible live. The live recordings I've seen, and the song remains the same and all that. Only Celebration Day kind of comes close to capturing how they really sounded. But it's because the hugeness of their sound in the spaces that they played in is pretty hard to capture being played back on your TV or a computer or anything, you know. I was glad I saw Becoming Led Zeppelin in the movie theater, because that did kind of approximate, just because you're hearing it on a movie theater sound system with the subwoofers and everything. But they sounded huge. And all rock bands did, because the arenas that they played in were not meant for, you know, acoustics weren't taken into consideration when they're making a multi-purpose arena. It's like there's a place that you got a basketball game one night, you got monster trucks or wrestling another night, and then you might have Led Zeppelin or any other kind of rock concert. I can't imagine the logistics that go into that, because, you know, the basketball courts are always just like flawless. I admire that kind of thing. This is what happened. So it was about a year and a half after I first had heard them. And in the meantime, their second album had come out, and they were getting ready to release the third album. This is August of 1970. And I'm in Virginia Beach, Virginia, with my brother and my mom, because my mom was from Virginia. And every summer she would take us back there so she could visit her family. And my family, too. I always enjoyed going back to Virginia. A lot of cousins there, still do. And we're in Virginia Beach on the tail end of this trip. And I get word that Led Zeppelin is going to be playing a concert in the area. And I think I heard a radio ad, or maybe I saw something in the newspaper, I don't know. But at any rate, I was gone. I went and bought my ticket before I even asked permission. I'm 16 years old. I went and bought that ticket. The ticket, I've looked it up. There are copies of the advertisements on Led Zeppelin's website, and that concert went for. There were 3 levels of seats you could buy. You could get $4, $5, or the $6. I can't remember if I went for the $5 or the $6. I know I didn't go for the cheap seats, but so, you know, Taylor Swift and Beyonce should take note of those prices. And all the concerts were like that. I saw Jimi Hendrix. I paid like $6, and everybody made money. whatever. So I bought the ticket before I even asked. And I get back and I show it to my mom and I say, look, Led Zeppelin. And she said, when's that? And I said, August 10th. She said, no, that's the day we're going to Williamsburg. And I'm like, oh, God. Williamsburg, there's Colonial Williamsburg. And it's like a history theme park, and it's very nice, and it's interesting, and it actually dates back to the 1600s. That area is where, John Smith and all those guys did their thing way back when. But my mom had already taken us there like a million times. And I said, I've been to Williamsburg. And she said, well, yeah, but that's the only day we can go, blah, blah, blah. I said, look, Hampton Roads Coliseum is on the way. You can drop me off. But we'll be going there. We'll be going past there like at noon. You'd have to wait all day. And I said, that's okay. I don't care. I'll be fine. Well, how will you get back? I said, there's a bus. And she was still reluctant, but she gave in. So that's what transpired. At noon on that day, they dropped me off in front of the Hampton Roads Coliseum, which was fairly new at the time, I think. And there was nobody there. The parking lot was empty. It's this great big circular place. And I just stand in front of it. And it's all, it's all dark inside and nothing going on. And after about an hour and a half, I'm getting really bored. So I decided to explore and walk around the building. And it was a big round building. It was like the Denver Coliseum or the LA Forum, just a big round multi-purpose arena. Like I say, it could be used for Disney on Ice or monster trucks or whatever you got. Well, I walked along, and about every 50 feet of this giant round building is a door. And I'd pull on it. Locked. I'd keep going. Another 50 feet, another door. I'd pull on it. Locked. I kept going this way until I got nearly to the opposite end of the building, and I pulled on a door, and it opened. Aha, I'm in. And I felt in my pocket, made sure I had my ticket. And I didn't feel like I was busting into the place. I'm just, I'm going to take my seat a little early. I just getting bored sitting out. It wasn't even a place to sit, standing outside. It was dark in there, and I walked in. I finally came where I'm in the arena part of it, and I could see they're setting up the stage. And like a moth drawn to a flame, I walked down toward the activity to watch these guys setting up for the show. And the guy sees me and he says, hey, come here. I thought, well, this is going to be it. And I'll show him my ticket and he'll probably still put me out. No. What he did is he points to a box and he says, take those drivers and mount them on those horns up there. At this point, like I said, I was 16, but I'd been in show business for a good year at this point. And I knew that these big, heavy Altec Lansing drivers were the things that made the sound come out of those big multi-cell horns. So I thought, all right, yeah. Climb up a ladder, and I'm bolting the drivers, helping set up the sound system. And it was like, well, this is more interesting than being outside. And I did that on both sides of the stage. Got them. Thankfully, I didn't have to. They didn't say, "All right, start wiring them up," because I wouldn't have known what the hell I was doing at that point. But then I just kind of concentrated on staying out of the way and not, not getting yelled at or thrown out. And then before you knew it, they set up. They're setting up the mics and they're going check 1 2 3 1 2 3, all that kind of stuff, getting everything set up. They say, okay, it's time for the sound check. The band is here. And I looked, was like a tunnel that led up to the stage, and it was, I remember it was painted white. The walls of this tunnel were painted white, and then here comes the 4 members of Led Zeppelin. And recognized them as Englishmen immediately because their complexions matched the whitewash on the walls. I'd never seen such pale creatures in my life, and I immediately knew what John Lennon was talking about when he talked about getting a tan sitting in the English rain. But it was exciting because they were, that's Led Zeppelin. And again, I just stayed out of the way, and they went through their sound check, and they played a few songs. And I was standing over on the left side of the stage. If you were facing the stage, I'm on the left. Is that stage left or is that stage right? I get that mixed up. That's stage left. Anyway, left-hand side of the stage if you're looking toward the stage. And that's where John Paul Jones was set up. And they had Hammond B3 there, which was a thing that was my object of desire, wanted so badly to own one of those things. And when they were done with the sound check, I had the nerve to ask John Paul Jones if he minded if I played on the B3. And he said, yeah, no, go ahead. Which was amazing. Why, I still can't get over that. But it was rented. They didn't tote the thing around, too heavy. And so they go, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm able to play on the organ. And it was so cool because it sounded so big in that space, reverberating off all those hard surfaces. Before that, I should mention, I had been assigned a role for the show, and I couldn't believe this. And that was, the guy said, look, after they do this many songs, they're gonna switch to acoustic guitars and sit down. And you have to go take these folding chairs over to these, he showed me a spot on the stage, it was marked, had marks on it. Set them up there quick and then get out of the way. So when it came time to do the show, I had a job. I watched the whole show from the wings, and then I did the roadie dance where you run in a crouch, carrying two folding chairs, set them up real quick, and then run in a crouch. You're trying not to be seen and just run away. I don't know how I knew to do that. I mean, it was instinctive. But it was so cool. And they did their acoustic set. It was like they were ahead of their time with that because this is, good 12 years before MTV Unplugged. But it was a nice break. And this was before Led Zeppelin 3 was released, but they did a couple of songs from Led Zeppelin 3, from the second side that has all the acoustic stuff. It was very cool. But that's what happened. And even though I saw them 5 times, that's the one that I remember. And why wouldn't I? Because it's been well over 50 years. And but to stand on the stage as they're rocking out was an experience I'll never forget. It was just monumental. It was just so very cool. And after it was all over, I hitchhiked back to Virginia Beach. I had fibbed. There was no bus. So I used my thumb, and I got back all right. And it was a great memory. And I just thought that I was thinking about Led Zeppelin for some reason, and this was always one of my very favorite of their records. It's just the first thing. So if you stuck around this far, I'll show you what Page did to make it sound so different. And basically, he had a formula he'd worked out that I think he said distance means depth. He included the ambience of the room they recorded in addition to close miking, because at that time, everything had been, for rock records, it was all close mic'd, and that was just a recent innovation. So I'll show you what he did with the computer and try to simulate. It'll be a crude simulation. follow along with me on this fool's errand of trying to illustrate what Page did to make that Led Zeppelin record sound different. And it's a fool's errand because there's no guitar here. No strings will vibrate because no strings are attached. What I've got is you can see it's a sampled Stratocaster. Page was playing a Telecaster. So what are you going to do? There's a emulation of a Marshall. He was playing a Supro amp, whatever the hell that is. So forget about it. It's not going to sound exactly the same because it's not a guitar. This is just for entertainment purposes only. I don't know. I mean, it's not going to sound the same. But what I want to show you is his innovation was the miking of the guitar. And what Geoff Emerick, who was engineer for the Beatles, innovated was close miking. And you can see that here. You got two cabinets, each with a mic. And in this software, you can choose different microphones and whatnot. And this is what the close miking sounds like. You hear it's just... What Page wanted to do is he wanted to get the room. And you got controls here. You see that? Dial in the room. You can set the size. We're going to set it to large because they were in Olympic Studios, which had been a movie theater before it was converted into a recording studio. It had a 30-foot ceiling. It was a big room. So, again, close mic. Page put in a room mic and blended them together. He had a room mic. Sometimes it would be, like you see, these are here, right up against the cabinet. He would put a mic 20 feet back and blend that in using a different fader on the console. And he'd dial in how much of the room sound he wanted. And he did the same sort of thing with the drums as well. And he used the natural ambience. And then it's quite possible that they also used a plate to put even more reverb on. Yeah, it might be too much there. So, right? Still doesn't sound like it, but it's as close as we're going to get, But anyway, Zeppelin it was just full. It was big. That whole idea of distance means depth is the concept that he had of setting a mic back away from the amp and mixing that in with the amp is how he managed to capture that sound that you hear whenever you hear a big old rock band in an arena that then is not designed acoustically for that kind of stuff. And it's got, everything sounds big and the sound reverberates all over. He managed to catch that on record, and it was striking at that time. And that record still sounds good. Anyway, it was just another thing that kind of made me convinced that I had picked the right path for myself, because I just felt so at home in that environment. And that's why I just gravitated right down to that stage. And I kept pulling on doors until I could get into that place. And I was determined to do that. And it reinforced my desire to be a part of that world of music and to be a musician. And I kept pulling on doors until 11 years later, I was back at the Hampton Roads Coliseum, only this time as the keyboard player with Michael Jackson and the Jacksons. So there it is. You know, if one door doesn't open, go find another one. All right, it's enough. I've said enough. It's quite enough. I hope I haven't offended any of my friends across the pond with talk of getting a tan from the English rain. But it's true. These guys were pale, you know. So there it is. Enough. See you next time. I'll be back with more true stories of show business. And see you next time. Bye-bye.